Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now in the section called Birds of Passage to poem number 6, Year of Meteors, 1859 to 1860. This is one of these poems in Leaves of Grass where knowing a little bit of the history of Whitman's actual life will help here. He probably saw two different times meteor showers in 1833 and 1858 to help him, motivate him to write this. However, in this poem, meteors, so let's put this right now at 2b, meteors will not actually be the physical, but rather we're going to be talking about some individual events that are happening, and especially as it relates to persons themselves. Think of it this way, though. December 1859 to November 1860 is the last year before the Great War, the war that will change everything, including, of course, as we've said before many times, Whitman himself. Now, our assumption is that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, you found our playlist called Talks with Walt, and we started with inscriptions. We worked all the way through all of the preceding 5 poems of Birds of Passage, and now we will turn to this one. Let's begin, as we always like to do, with our Nortons, with some background information. Nortons tells us that in 1865 and in 67, this poem was in drum taps. In 1871, 72, and 76, it was in a Leaves of Grass group, from which it was transferred to the present group in 1881. And in some notes, Nortons continues, Walt Whitman describes 2 meteor showers, one happening November 13th, 1833, in a prose paragraph, and the other November 12th and 13th, 1858, in 5 trial lines, which may have been intended for his Pictures poem. Now, in this set of lines, we're going to hear important events referred to. The election of Lincoln. We're going to hear about the execution of John Brown, the kind of fanatical abolitionist. We're going to hear about the census of 1860, which already began to talk about how America was growing commercially, as well as the number of immigrants that were coming to America. We're also going to hear about New York and the first visit of British royalty, especially the Prince of Wales. Later would be, of course, King Edward VII. This would happen in October. And in fact, there are some removed lines that we'll talk about where Whitman actually says, "I know not why, but I loved you," which is fascinating that he decided to get rid of those lines. In June, the arrival of the Great Eastern, which was the largest steamship, a British steamship. And then finally we have Comets and Meteors, as we've mentioned already, from 1860, which will seem like maybe omens of a kind. So as we now turn to the poem itself, we'll enjoy seeing the way that he will say again and again, "I would" or "I sing." All right, let's play the game out. By the way, the word meteors, you'll probably remember, was used already in Song of Myself, passage 33. And he'll begin. Year of meteors, and by the way, we've got at least 6 of these exclamation points. Brooding year, only one other time, Proud Music of the Storm, passage 2, where he'll use this word brooding. I think it's an important word. That is to say that there's a sense that something is impending, both obviously good as well as bad. He says, "I would bind in words retrospective some of your deeds and signs." This idea of binding, I think in many ways, is the role that Whitman understood as a poet. And as well, the Return of the Heroes, passage 3, uses this binding idea. Interlacing vines binds all. This bringing together. I would bind in words retrospective some of your deeds and signs. Obviously, these meteors are going to have certain kind of sense of special signs. I would sing your contest for the 19th Presidentad. Now here again, obviously the 1860 Lincoln-Douglas election. I would sing how an old man, obviously we're talking here about the abolitionist John Brown, who will be hanged 2 December of 59. How an old man, tall with white hair, mounted the scaffold in Virginia. This scaffolding, go back and look at what T.S. Eliot says in Little Kidding 5 about 3 men on a scaffold. It's just interesting, the echoes and the resonances in Eliot's work. And then he'll tell us in parenthetics, "I was at hand, silent I stood with teeth shut close. I watched, I stood very near you, old man, when Cool and indifferent, but trembling with age and your unhealed wounds, you mounted the scaffold. We've already talked about Whitman as abolitionist, so his watching John Brown's execution is now mentioned. I would sing in my copious song, and already we've heard this, I would sing, now we're going to hear it again, and all the way through this poem. I would sing in my copious song, your census returns of the states. Again, the idea that now America is growing, we have statistical value. The tables of populations and products. I would sing of your ships and their cargoes, the proud black ships of Manhattan arriving, some filled with immigrants, some from the isthmus with cargoes of gold. Songs thereof would I sing, to all that hitherward comes would I welcome give. Sounding, of course, very much like the lines on the Statue of Liberty in that famous poem, welcoming all. And you would I sing, fair stripling. Here obviously we're talking about Edward, Prince of Wales, the 11th of October 1860. This was the first visit of British royalty. Welcome to you from me, young Prince of England, and then in parenthetics, remember you surging Manhattan crowds as you passed with your cortege of nobles. There in the crowd stood I and singled you out with attachment. As I said, in lines that he would later drop, he said, I know not why, but I loved you. Here he just uses this notion of attachment that we've seen a number of times already in Leaves of Grass. Nor forget I to sing of the wonder. The ship as she swam up my bay, well-shaped and stately, the Great Eastern swam up my bay. She was 600 feet long, her moving swiftly, surrounded by myriads of small craft. I forget not to sing. This, of course, again, the British steamship, 28 June of 1860. Nor, to continue, he says, the Comet that came unannounced out of the north, flaring in heaven. You'll maybe remember, since we were mentioning T.S. Eliot before, East Coker 2, comets weep and learneds fly, hunt the heavens and the plains, world in a vortex that shall bring, all of that, right? Nor the strange, huge meteor procession, dazzling and clear, shooting over our heads. And then in parenthetics again, a moment long it sailed its balls of unearthly light over our heads, then departed, dropped in the night, and was gone. All of these events, he says, of such and fitful as they, I sing. With gleams from them would I gleam and patch these chants. Do you remember this gleams of half-extinguished thought from Wordsworth's Tintern Abbey? The echoes are here played out. Your chants, he continues. O year, all molted with evil and good. Think about that molted word, right? Spotting, smears of color, we might say, right? With evil and good. And then the dash to make us think of our Emily Dickinson. Year of forebodings. Are you ready for this? That's the only time in all of Leaves of Grass that the word forebodings gets used. Not ever used in drum taps now as it's in the deathbed edition, but here forebodings. In other words, a certain kind of bad or ill feeling, right? Year of comets and meteors, transient and strange. You'll remember this word transient to think of time, passage 9. Lo, even here, one equally transient, strange. So he begins to identify with the meteor. As I flit through you hastily, soon to fall and be gone. What is this chant? What am I myself but one of your meteors? Now, think about this. In 1859, he's 40. And he says hastily, soon to fall and be gone. But he'll die 33 years later, right? So he's gonna live way beyond the year 40. What am I myself? We think, of course, Song of Myself, but one of your meteors. And we want to point this out, obviously, the symbolism that's being played out here. At 2a, well, obviously our theme's message is here that events in history produce great individuals and great moments for those individuals. At 2b, I like the repetitiveness of this I sing. This is an unusual poem. We don't have, in Leaves of Grass, a lot of these kind of poems that are so much built on the events historically of a given moment in time. We'll have more to say about this, obviously, when we hit drum taps itself. At 3a, there's a lot of places I could go, but I just want to point out that Emerson's great man theory, as we've talked about it at Learn Strong, we've given full lectures over all of Emerson's major essays. Representative Man, you'll remember Carlyle, he borrows this idea from, this idea that humans, especially males for Emerson, are going to be the beginners of so much culturally that will happen. Which will lead us finally at 3b to use this idea of meteors as symbolism of a kind. What are the meteors today or this year for you in your estimation? And what are the three maybe most important quote-unquote meteors or happenings of the last 10 years? And then finally, do you believe in this idea of the great man or great woman theory? That is to say, if Rosa Parks doesn't do what Rosa Parks does, we do not have the powerful civil rights movement that will happen. Individuals, in many ways, will predetermine what happens in culture. Let's now move on to poem number 7, a very interesting little poem with antecedents as we are finishing up now Birds of Passage. Thank you.